Of course, with the piano part, if you want to go a step further, instead of just playing the right hand voicing at bar 17, you can also include any other notes that aren't the root of the chord. So for the first chord, B flat was the root. We don't want to play the B flat. So the B flat down here, we're not going to use that. But you'll notice there's an A flat. We can play that one. So we're now in bar 17 going to play this, followed by this, and then we'll stick with that in the second bar. So we play. So now let's put a proper drum part with it. Let's use what's written in the drum music as the starting point in the same way that we have for the piano and the bass parts, and we'll bring the drum part to life by making it sound like jazz drummers have always played. And then we'll hear what it sounds like when we put it all together. I think you'll be quite amazed at the difference, how obvious the difference is between playing exactly what's written and playing what's intended by knowing these few things and using them as you read. So let's dive straight into this. The information that the part gives us is that at 17 it says in 4. So that's telling the drummer that the bass player is playing 4 crotchets in each bar, a walking bass line, 4 notes in each bar. So that should affect what we play. And one of the first things that should happen is that your ride cymbal beat or your ride cymbal pattern should have the crotchets all the same volume as a starting point. So I'll show you what I mean. If I just play the crotchets, and I'll make them all the same volume as each other. And then when I put that quaver in after 2 and after 4, we call those the skip notes. They can either be the same volume or a little softer or a little louder, but we want the crotchets themselves all to be the same so that it lines up with the way that the bass player plays, which is do, 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 all the same. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So hopefully you can hear that the 4 crotchets in the bar are all the same volume and those skip notes move in around them but don't affect them. The other information it gives us is that the hi-hat, and we tend to see notes with stems going downwards, meaning with the feet in drum notation. The hi-hats are on beat 2 and 4. But again, if that's all we played, that ride cymbal pattern and hi-hats on 2 and 4, we get that plain vanilla version that I played you earlier. Here's what we can do to improve it. Jazz drummers do a thing called feathering the bass drum. And to feather the bass drum, you want to play the bass drum as softly as you can on the beat with the bass. The rule is, if you can hear it in the band, it's too loud. And we just use it as a way of centering our time feel ourselves and a way of connecting everything through all of the frequencies of the drum kit. And the best way that it was ever explained to me was when I had a lesson with a fantastic world-class drummer, Gregory Hutchinson. A few years ago, I was in New York, and he said, if you think of it happening on your knee rather than at your foot, you'll be able to get it soft enough. So now I'm going to put the ride cymbal, the hi-hat, and my feathering, my 4 crotchets on the bass drum, but so soft that you can't really hear them. I'm going to put them together. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And the final step as a starting point is that we do on the snare drum what the piano player does with where rhythmically they play the chords on the piano. And there's a few ideas of where this next term came from. Some say it was because of complementing. Other people tend to think that it's because it's a shortened form of the word accompanying. But musicians in the rhythm section, particularly jazz musicians, refer to this as comping. And comping is what we choose to do rhythmically with the chords in the piano, the chords that a guitarist might play, and basically as a starting point, the snare drum, and then later on the snare drum and some louder notes on the bass drum. I'll show you what I mean. Again, just like the piano, between beats is better than on beats, and gaps are good. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So now let me give you the version of 17 that you could choose to play based on what's written, but because you know all of these other things about rhythm section playing. So once again, the ride cymbal, the hi-hat, and the feathering in the bass drum are locking in the time with the bass player, and the snare drum is playing comping ideas. And because I'm playing this separately, because obviously I, the drummer, can't play with me, the piano player, I'm not going to be able to listen to the piano playing and have that dialogue. So we'll see what comes out. But generally what you should be doing is listening to the piano player and having a conversation with your comping that complements what they're doing in their comping. I think that's probably a topic for another one of these videos. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3. So now back to our piano part. Sometimes what you'll find in music that's written with students in mind, particularly at the younger age range, is that the left hand of the piano part will actually be the bass line. And the written bass line that your bass player is playing is then doubled by the piano player. That's a very strange sound, and that's not something that ever really happens in a musical setting. So here's my rule with that. If you're a piano player and you see something that looks and sounds like a bass line in the left hand, put your left hand behind your back. Don't use it. And concentrate just on the right hand. The bass player's job is to take care of the bass function of the chords. The piano player's job is to add, contribute the other important notes of the chord. So I'll give you an example. What's written for you is a B flat 9 chord, and the notes in that chord are B flat, that's the root, the bottom of the chord, and then we go up with little leaps. So it's 1, 3, 5, that 7th, that's a dominant 7th because it's a dominant chord, not that 7th, that 7th, 3, 5, dominant 7, and then that's the 9. So you go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's what we call a closed voicing. All the notes are as close together as possible. And a lot of you will know about inversions from theory. So an inversion is where you start on that note and then that note ends up there. So that's an inversion, that's the first inversion. The second inversion, you put that note there, so you get... So they all have different sounds, but they're all the same chord. And the great thing about these jazz voicings that piano players use is that you can basically move any note anywhere you like. We're going to leave this one out because that note belongs to the bass player. We need the bass player to have the root of the chord available to them, and that's one of their primary functions, so we don't need to worry about it in the piano part. So what we can do is we can play bar 17 like that, or we can move that note down there. So that note's now gone to there. We can move that note to there if we wanted to. Same chord. Remember this note, the B flat, is the bass player's job. We could put this note here. And that note, the C, up there. We could move the F back up here. So there's hundreds probably of ways that we can play that first chord. And that's part of the fun. You can change it every time. Talk to your piano teacher. Jazz piano teachers will give you fairly common standard ways, and depending on what chord you're going to next, that'll inform your choice as well. But the crux of it is you can play that note in any voicing that you can come up with. So what we could do is we could play the written part and just get rid of that root note. So the way that it's written, we've got that, and that at 17. Take this one away and you've got that. The next chord, we don't need that, the B natural, because that's the bass player's job. So we're now going to, and then we leave the C and the F to the bass player. So there are your three chords, but you can change those voicings altogether. You could maybe play the 7th, the 9th, the 5th, and the 3rd up there. And then you've got, there's your first chord, and then maybe your second chord would be that. So you go from 2, 3, 4. And then you use a closed voicing for the F6. Or do something even more exciting. Maybe get rid of that because it's not needed and put the D down the bottom. So that becomes your next one. So let me give you an example of what it might look like if I used some of the written voicings and made some of them up myself. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Two, 1, 2, 3, 4.